It was a scorching Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun seemed to press down relentlessly, leaving no escape except for the cool relief of water. I had spent most of the day reclining beside the pool, immersed in a novel, occasionally dipping my toes in to fend off the heat. These tranquil afternoons were my sanctuary. The quiet, the solitude. There was something deeply soothing about having the backyard to myself, with nothing but the distant chirping of birds and the soft lapping of water against the pool's edge filling the silence. I had just turned a page in my book and was sipping a glass of lemonade when movement at the side of my yard caught my attention. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor. They often dropped by for a quick chat or to borrow something, but this was someone unfamiliar. A man, likely in his early 40s, clad in a simple t-shirt and swim trunks, with dark hair tousled by the breeze. He didn't look like he belonged in the neighborhood. He stood hesitantly at the gate, scanning his surroundings. A flicker of unease ran through me as I straightened in my chair. My heart beat a little faster. Perhaps he was lost. Watching him glance from the pool back to the gate, it became evident he wasn't about to leave. Curiosity sparked. I set my book aside on the chaise lounge and approached the pool's edge, keeping my gaze locked on him. "Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady, though a trace of nerves lingered beneath my tone. The man met my eyes, offering a sheepish grin as if he hadn't intended to be caught. "I'm really sorry to bother you. I swear I mean no harm," he said, his voice warm yet uncertain. "I guess you could say, I'm lost." "Lost?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "This is a residential area, not exactly the middle of nowhere." He chuckled lightly. "Fair point. I've been walking for a while thinking I was heading toward the main road, but I must have taken a wrong turn." His gaze flickered to the pool again before returning to me. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just was hoping to cool off for a moment, if that's all right." I hesitated, evaluating him. He didn't seem threatening, just an ordinary man who might have had a rough day or needed a break. Though I was usually protective of my space, there was something about him, an air of sincerity, a quiet vulnerability. He shifted slightly, as though unsure whether to stay or go. I looked at the shimmering water, so inviting under the afternoon sun. A part of me wanted to maintain my solitude, but something about his tentative request made me reconsider. "I'm not sure," I started to say, but felt a shift within myself. I didn't want to be the type of person who turned away someone simply seeking a moment of kindness. "All right," I said after a pause, surprising myself. "But just for a little while." Relief washed over his face, and he nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. I promise I won't overstay." I stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He approached the pool cautiously, dipping his toes into the water before sighing in visible relief. "I've been walking in this heat for hours," he murmured, almost to himself. "This is exactly what I needed." I settled back into my lounge chair, unsure of what to say. Having a stranger in my backyard, let alone my personal retreat, felt unusual. Yet, there was something familiar about him, something calming in his presence. He wasn't just some random passerby. He carried a quiet demeanor that made me feel more at ease than I had expected. He glanced toward my chair where my towel rested. "Would you mind if I—" He trailed off, motioning toward it. I didn't think I'd be here long enough to need one. A small smile tugged at my lips. "Go ahead." He removed his shirt and stepped into the pool with an effortless grace, as though he had done this countless times before. As he waded in, the tension I had felt earlier slowly dissipated. He was simply someone in need of respite, and for some reason I had offered it. A comfortable silence settled between us. The only sounds the occasional ripple of water and the rustling of leaves. I found myself watching him more than I intended, noticing the way he seemed to relax as if the water provided him a form of release. I wondered where he had come from, what had led him here. But I didn't ask. There was no urgency to know. After some time, he turned, catching me observing him. "Sorry if I'm making things awkward," he said, his voice tinged with apology. "I tend to zone out in the water. It clears my mind." "No need to apologize," I replied, a faint smile forming. "I get it. It's peaceful." He nodded, then glanced skyward, as if gathering his thoughts. "You live here alone?" The question caught me off guard, but it wasn't intrusive. Just curious. He seemed genuinely interested, not prying. "I do." I admitted quietly. I like the quiet. Yeah, he murmured thoughtfully. I can see that. Sometimes solitude isn't a bad thing. It gives you time to think. I nodded, his words settling more deeply than I had expected. I enjoyed my independence, sometimes a little too much. But as I observed him, a stranger who had wandered unexpectedly into my world, I couldn't help but wonder if it was time to let someone in. Just a little. Sensing the change in atmosphere, he shifted. I should probably go, he said, standing slowly. But I really appreciate you letting me stay. I stood as well, caught off guard by the sudden finality in his tone. Of course, I said, trying to mask an unexpected pang of disappointment. Take care. He offered a warm smile, one that reached his eyes. You too, and thanks again. As he left, slipping quietly through the gate, I felt something shift within me. What had started as an unusual, even unsettling encounter had left an imprint. I wasn't sure what it meant yet, but I knew it was something I would think about for a long time. Sitting back down, the silence returned, but it felt different now. The solitude wasn't quite the same, as if it were waiting for something. A few days passed, yet his image lingered in my mind. I told myself it was a fleeting moment, nothing more. He had simply sought a brief respite. Yet, something about him, the quiet understanding in his eyes, the way he treated me with effortless respect, stayed with me. I continued with my daily routine, distracting myself with chores, reading, and busying my mind. But every so often, my thoughts would drift back to him. What was he doing now? What kind of life did he have? Maybe I was just a little lonely. Maybe it was the way he had entered my world without disruption, making my solitude feel less like isolation and more like a choice. So when I wandered back to the pool a few days later, a quiet curiosity stirred within me. I stood at the water's edge wondering, would he return? It was an absurd thought, but I couldn't shake it. Just as I dismissed the notion, footsteps approached. My heart stuttered. There he was, standing at the gate, a hesitant smile playing on his lips. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Should I invite him in again? Was it too soon? He shifted, looking uncertain. Hope I'm not intruding. A smile formed before I could stop it. No, you're not. Actually, I was just thinking about you. His brow lifted slightly. Really? Yeah, I admitted, feeling warmth rise to my cheeks. I wasn't sure if you'd come back, but here you are. His smile deepened, his eyes crinkling in amusement. Funny how things work out, isn't it? I nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to see him again. It wasn't something I had anticipated. I hadn't even considered the possibility of him returning. Yet there he was, standing before me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. So, he said after a brief hesitation, is it all right if I join you for another swim? I promise I won't be a bother. I shrugged, not even pretending to weigh the question. Of course. Honestly, I'm just glad you're here. It's been a little too quiet around here. His expression softened. I understand. I've been in that place before. Sometimes the quiet can be overwhelming. Something in his voice made me feel like he truly understood. It wasn't just idle conversation. It was personal. I wondered if he was going through something, if that was what had led him into my backyard that day. Maybe he was just searching for someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I gestured to the pool. Go ahead, make yourself comfortable. I'll be here. His smile returned, less hesitant this time, and he slipped into the water. His movements were smoother now, more assured, as though he had found some kind of peace in the pool's embrace. I settled back into my chair, not so much to observe him, but to reflect on the strange nature of our meeting. I wasn't sure why I felt so open to his presence, but there was a sense of safety with him. He had entered my world so effortlessly, without disruption, and it created a quiet intimacy between us. Unspoken, but undeniable. Time stretched in an easy silence. He swam while I returned to my book, but I found myself glancing up occasionally, just to confirm he was still there. Just to remind myself that this unusual connection wasn't something I had merely imagined. He never seemed bothered by the quiet, and that, more than anything, made me feel even more at ease. There was no need for small talk. No pressure to fill the space with words, just presence. After some time, he swam toward the pool's edge, resting his arms on the side as he looked up at me. I feel like I've known you longer than just a couple of days, he said, his voice calm but sincere. You're easy to be around. I met his gaze, really seeing him for the first time. There was a depth to him, a quiet intensity that drew me in. I felt an unexplainable pull, and for a fleeting moment I wondered if he felt it too. I don't know, I admitted with a small shrug. Maybe it's just that sometimes you meet people who feel familiar, even when you've just met. He smiled at that, the warmth in his eyes making the space between us feel smaller. That might be it. Maybe that's why I ended up here, just drawn to the right place at the right time. His words lingered in the air between us. He wasn't just saying them to fill the silence. He meant them. And for some reason, that honesty made me feel safe, more connected than I had in a long time. As he swam again, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way this afternoon had unfolded, or maybe it was something deeper, something I wasn't quite ready to name. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. The evening drifted by gently. He stayed for another hour, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, he finally emerged from the water. Droplets slid down his skin as he lingered at the pool's edge. I should probably get going, he said, his voice carrying that same casual warmth. I nodded, though a part of me wished he would stay longer. Thanks for coming back, I said quietly. It's nice to have company, even just for a little while. I'm glad I could be that for you, he replied, his voice low but carrying a warmth that sent a small shiver through me. Take care of yourself, and if you ever need company again, you know where to find me. He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and walked through the gate, disappearing into the night. The silence returned, but it felt different now, as though something had shifted in the air. A door had opened, and I wasn't sure what lay beyond it. But for the first time in a while, I was curious to find out. The days after his second visit blurred together. I kept myself busy, but the thought of him lingered in the back of my mind like a whisper. His visit had been brief, yet it left an imprint I couldn't shake. I had no idea what it meant or where it would lead, but something had changed. I felt more present, more connected to the world around me than I had in a long time. Then, one morning, as I sipped my coffee by the pool, enjoying the early stillness, I heard footsteps approaching again. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced up, expecting a neighbor or a passerby. But no, it was him again. He stood at the gate, that same hesitant smile playing on his lips. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, his voice warm yet unsure. I set my coffee down and stood, feeling a rush of emotions I hadn't quite sorted through. Not at all. Actually, I'm glad to see you again, I admitted, my voice steadier than I expected. I wasn't sure if you'd come back. He shrugged as he stepped through the gate, as if entering my space was the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't sure either, he confessed. But I couldn't stop thinking about that day. It felt right, like I was meant to be here, with you. His words sent a shiver through me. It was unexpected, but undeniably sincere. My heart fluttered, and I took a step toward him without thinking. I'm glad, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. I've been thinking about you too. His smile deepened, something tender in his eyes. I'm relieved I'm not the only one. I don't know what it is, but I feel this pull between us, something unspoken. And I didn't want to ignore it. I nodded, understanding that feeling completely. The connection between us felt effortless, like an old friendship rather than a new acquaintance. There were no walls, no need for pretense, just honesty. After a moment, I broke the silence. You know, I've always loved the quiet. I never minded being alone, but today I think I'd like some company. Would you join me for a swim? His eyes brightened, a flicker of excitement crossing his face. I'd love to. I wasn't sure if I should ask, but I'm glad you did. I gestured toward the water, feeling an unexpected rush of anticipation. This wasn't just about the pool or the afternoon. It was about the connection forming between us, the quiet trust we were building without effort. He slid into the water and I followed. We moved together in the silence, the water rippling around us. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. No words were needed. Just being here was enough. As the evening deepened, we floated side by side, watching the sky shift into hues of pink and gold. I'm glad you came back, I murmured. I'm glad you invited me, he replied. I thought I was just looking for a place to swim, but I think I found something more. Something I didn't know I needed. I turned toward him, his face softened by the fading light. I feel the same way. I don't know what this is, but I want to find out. He met my gaze, something unguarded in his expression. Me too. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Instead, I was open to whatever came next. And that felt like the start of something real.